The knife was already at her throat when Alira Voss realized the wedding carriage had stopped in the wrong place. "This is not the Blackridge border," she said, her voice steady even as her heart pounded against her ribs. The man holding the blade smiled without warmth. "No, it is not." Outside the carriage, the forest was silent, in the way forests go silent right before something terrible happens. No birds, no wind, just the low growl of wolves circling in the dark, wolves that did not belong to the pack she was supposed to marry into. Alira's fingers curled into the fabric of her wedding dress. She had agreed to this marriage to save her people, not to die in a ditch 3 miles from the only safety she had left. She thought of her younger brother, thin and coughing back home, and of the empty grain stores that had forced her father to make this bargain in the first place. She had not come this far to fail before she even reached the altar. A howl cut through the night, closer than the others, sharp and commanding. The rogue wolves outside the carriage flinched. Then came another sound, heavier, faster, the unmistakable thunder of a much larger wolf crashing through the underbrush. The man with the knife turned his head just as the carriage door was torn from its hinges. What stepped into the moonlight was not a rescuer in the gentle sense of the word. It was over 7 feet of muscle and fur, eyes glowing a deep amber, teeth bared in a silent promise of violence to anyone who did not move fast enough. Alpha Cade Thornwood had come for his bride, not because he wanted her, but because a dead bride was worse for his pack than a living stranger he did not love. The rogue wolves scattered within seconds. Cade did not chase them. He simply stood there, breathing hard, watching Alira with an expression she could not read. "You are late," he said, once he had shifted back and pulled on the plain shirt one of his men handed him. His voice was rough, like gravel dragged over stone. Alira straightened her torn sleeve, refusing to let her hands shake. "I was ambushed. I apologize for the inconvenience of almost being killed." Something flickered in his eyes, not quite amusement, not quite respect, but close to both. "Careful," he said. "Sharp words do not suit an Omega." "Then it is fortunate," she replied, "that you did not marry me for my manners." For a moment, silence stretched between them, thick and strange. Then Cade turned away, ordering his men to secure the road, and Alira was left standing in the wreckage of her wedding carriage, wondering exactly what kind of man she had just agreed to spend her life with. The attack, she would later learn, was no accident. Rogue wolves did not simply appear near a royal wedding route without a reason, and the timing was too perfect to be chance. Someone had known she would be traveling that night. Someone had wanted her gone before she ever reached Blackridge territory. But there was no time to dwell on it. The convoy reformed within the hour, grim-faced warriors flanking the new carriage that had been brought in its place. Alira sat across from an older woman named Isolde, one of the pack's healers, who had been sent to accompany her the rest of the way. "You handled that well," Isolde said quietly, studying Alira with sharp, assessing eyes. "Most brides would have screamed the whole valley awake." "Screaming does not usually solve anything," Alira said. Isolde's mouth twitched, almost a smile. "No, it does not. You may do well here, child, or you may not survive the winter. Blackridge does not forgive weakness easily." It was not comforting, but Alira appreciated the honesty more than she would have appreciated a lie. By the time the gates of Blackridge came into view, dawn was breaking over the mountains, painting the stone walls a dull gold. The pack's territory was larger than Alira had imagined, ringed by dense forest and steep cliffs that seemed built to keep enemies out and secrets in. Guards lined the entrance, watching her carriage with open curiosity, some with suspicion, a few with something closer to pity. She understood why the moment she stepped down from the carriage and heard the whispers. "That's her? The Omega bride? She looks like she'll break in a strong wind. Poor thing has no idea what she's walked into." Alira kept her chin high and her expression calm, even as the words landed like small stones against her back. She had spent her whole life being underestimated. She was not about to let a crowd of strangers see how much it still stung. Cade walked several paces ahead of her, not bothering to offer his arm, not bothering to explain the stairs or soften the mood. He led her through the courtyard like a man delivering cargo rather than welcoming a bride, and Alira forced herself to match his pace, refusing to trail behind like something small and frightened. Inside the great hall, the pack's council had already gathered, arranged along both sides of a long stone table. At the head sat a woman with silver-streaked hair and eyes just as sharp as Cade's, though far less guarded. This, Illyra would soon learn, was Merrin, Cade's aunt and closest advisor since his parents had passed. "So this is the girl who is supposed to end our curse," Merrin said, studying Illyra from head to toe without any attempt at subtlety. "You are smaller than I expected." "I have been told that before," Illyra said evenly. "It has never stopped me from doing what needed to be done." A murmur passed through the council, somewhere between surprise and grudging interest. Cade, standing near the window with his arms crossed, said nothing, but Illyra caught the faintest shift in his posture, as though her answer had landed somewhere he had not expected. The ceremony itself was brief and businesslike, held that same afternoon in the Pax Stone Chapel, attended by council members and senior warriors rather than family, since Illyra's own family had been forbidden from traveling due to the danger on the roads. She stood beside Cade in a borrowed gown, repeating vows that felt more like a contract than a promise, while he recited his own portion in a flat, distant voice that made it clear exactly how he felt about the arrangement. When the elder pronounced them bonded, Cade did not smile. He did not reach for her hand. He simply nodded once, as though closing a business deal, and turned to address the room about patrol schedules for the coming week. Illyra stood there in her wedding dress, forgotten within seconds of becoming a wife, and told herself firmly that she had not expected romance. She had expected survival. She had expected safety for her people. Anything beyond that would be a bonus she had no right to hope for. That night, she was shown to her new chambers, a large but sparsely decorated room, connected to Cade's by a single locked door. A maid named Sable helped her out of the wedding gown, chattering nervously about pack customs and warning her, gently, not to wander the eastern wing after dark. "Why not?" Illyra asked. Sable hesitated. "That is where the old records are kept, the ones about the curse. Alpha Cade does not like anyone going through them without his permission." Illyra filed that information away carefully. If there was one thing she intended to do in this cold, unfamiliar place, it was understand the curse she had been sent to help break, and she doubted Cade planned to explain it to her willingly. Sleep did not come easily that night. She lay awake listening to the unfamiliar sounds of the fortress, distant howls, shifting guards, the wind pressing against old stone walls, and wondered what she had truly walked into. She had grown up hearing stories about the Thornwood curse, whispered warnings about alphas who died young, about a bloodline haunted by something no healer could cure. She had agreed to this marriage believing she was simply a bride, meant to calm old political tensions between packs. She did not yet know that the curse had a shape, a history, and a source, and that the answer was far closer to her than anyone in that fortress realized. Somewhere down the hall, Cade stood at his window, staring out at the dark tree line, his wolf restless beneath his skin, in a way it had not been in years. He told himself it was simply the stress of the ambush, the danger to a bride he did not want, but could not afford to lose. He told himself it had nothing to do with the quiet, unshaken girl now sleeping under his roof. He was wrong, though it would be a long time before either of them understood exactly how wrong. Morning arrived cold and clear, and with it came the first real test of Illyra's new life in Blackridge, though she did not know it yet as she dressed in the simple gray clothing left for her and stepped out to explore the fortress she now called home. The training yard buzzed with the sounds of clashing weapons and barked commands, warriors sparring in pairs beneath the sharp eyes of a scarred instructor. Illyra paused at the edge of the yard, watching the disciplined chaos with quiet fascination, until a voice beside her broke the moment. "You should not be here," the voice said, cool and clipped. She turned to find a broad-shouldered man, watching her with open distrust. He wore the markings of a beta, and something about his stance told her immediately that he did not approve of her presence in Blackridge, let alone in the training yard. "I was simply looking," Illyra said. "I did not realize looking was forbidden." "Nothing is forbidden," the man said, "but nothing here concerns you either. You are the Alpha's bride in name. Do not mistake that for authority." "Garrick," came Cade's voice from behind them, low and warning. "That is enough." The beta stiffened at his Alpha's tone, but did not fully back down. "I am only speaking the truth, Cade. The pack does not know her. They do not trust her. Half of them believe she was sent here to weaken us further, not to help. Illyra felt heat rise in her chest, not from embarrassment, but from something closer to determination. Then perhaps, she said, keeping her voice calm despite the tension humming beneath it, the pack should judge me by what I do, rather than by rumors spoken before I have even had breakfast. For a long moment, no one spoke. Then, unexpectedly, a low, rough sound came from Cade, almost a laugh, quickly smothered before it could fully form. Garrick's eyes narrowed, clearly unused to hearing that sound from his alpha, especially aimed at someone he still considered an outsider. "Get back to training," Cade said finally, and Garrick obeyed, though not without a final, measuring glance toward Illyra. When he was gone, Cade studied her for a long moment, arms crossed, expression unreadable. "You should be careful," he said. "Garrick is loyal to this pack above everything else. He does not trust easily." "Neither do I," Illyra said. "Perhaps that will give us something in common eventually." Cade's jaw tightened, though whether from irritation or something else entirely, Illyra could not tell. Without another word, he turned and walked away, leaving her standing at the edge of the training yard once more, watched by dozens of curious, wary eyes. She refused to let it break her stride. If Blackridge wanted proof that she was more than a fragile bargaining chip, she would give them proof, one small, undeniable act at a time. That opportunity came sooner than she expected, later that same afternoon, when a young pup wandered too close to the edge of the eastern cliffs while chasing a stray ball and slipped on loose rock, crying out in pain as his leg twisted beneath him. Warriors nearby rushed toward the sound, but Illyra, already close by from her earlier explorations, reached the boy first. She knelt beside him immediately, ignoring the panic of the surrounding adults, and began speaking to him in a low, steady voice while gently checking the injury. "It is not broken," she said calmly, more to reassure the boy than to inform the gathering crowd. "But it needs to be wrapped carefully before he moves again." Isolde arrived moments later, out of breath, and blinked in surprise at the sight of Illyra, already stabilizing the boy's leg with practiced hands. "You know healing?" "My people could not always afford proper healers," Illyra said simply, focusing on her work. "We learned to care for each other." By the time the boy was safely carried inside, wrapped and calm instead of screaming, word of the incident had already begun spreading through the fortress. It was a small thing, one injured child among many daily accidents, but it was enough to plant the first seed of doubt in the minds of those who had dismissed her as weak and useless. Cade heard about it that evening from Merrin, who delivered the news with a raised eyebrow and a tone that suggested she found the entire situation quietly amusing. "Your little bride has healer's hands," Merrin said. "The pack is talking about her differently already." Cade said nothing, staring into the fire in his study, jaw tight, thoughts louder than he wanted them to be. He told himself it did not matter what the pack thought of her. He told himself his own opinion had not shifted at all. But later that night, as he passed her door and heard the soft, exhausted sound of her breathing through the thin wood, something in his chest tightened in a way he refused to name. He was not ready to trust her. He was not ready to want her trust in return. But for the first time since the wedding, he found himself wondering exactly what kind of woman his father's old bargain had brought into his home, and whether the curse everyone feared might be far more complicated than anyone in Blackridge had ever imagined. Outside, the wind shifted through the mountains, carrying with it the faint, distant howl of wolves that did not belong to any pack nearby, a warning neither of them was awake to hear. The days that followed settled into an uneasy rhythm, one built more on silence than conversation, though Illyra refused to let that silence define her place in Blackridge. She rose early each morning, long before most of the fortress stirred, and spent her time learning the layout of the grounds, memorizing names, watching how the pack functioned beneath its rigid structure. She noticed things others overlooked, the way warriors avoided speaking of the curse directly, the way certain rooms in the eastern wing remained locked despite holding nothing more dangerous than old paper, the way Cade's shoulders tensed every time someone mentioned his father. She noticed, too, the way he watched her sometimes, quick glances he thought went unseen, gone the moment she turned to meet his eyes. It was not affection, not yet, but it was not indifference either, and Illyra found herself both wary and quietly curious about the distance between those two things. One evening, nearly 2 weeks after her arrival, She worked up the courage to knock on the door connecting their chambers. Cade opened it after a long pause, shirt sleeves rolled to his elbows, expression guarded. "Is something wrong?" he asked. "No," Illyra said. "I simply thought we should speak. We are married. It seems strange to live as strangers under the same roof." Something flickered across his face, gone too quickly to name. He stepped aside, allowing her into a study lined with old books and maps, a fire crackling low in the hearth. She had not been inside this room before. "I do not know what you expect from me," Cade said finally, settling into a chair without offering her one, though she took the seat across from him regardless. "This marriage was never meant to be a love story." "I am not asking for love," Illyra said. "I am asking for honesty. If we are meant to break a curse together, I would like to understand what I am fighting." Cade was quiet for a long moment, staring into the fire, as though weighing exactly how much to reveal. "The curse has followed my bloodline for 6 generations," he said finally. "Every alpha before me has died before their 40th year, often violently, often without warning. My father did not make it to 35. Illyra's chest tightened at the flat, practiced way he said it, as though grief had long since hardened into simple fact. "And the marriage bargain? How does that end it?" "An old prophecy claims the curse can be broken by binding an alpha of my bloodline to an omega chosen by fate," Cade said. "My counsel found you through old family records connecting your line to a pact made generations ago. Whether it is true or simply desperation dressed up as prophecy, I could not say." "You do not believe it will work," Illyra said quietly. "I believe," Cade said, meeting her eyes fully for the first time that evening, "that I did not have the luxury of doubting it. Not when the alternative was watching my pack fracture, while I waited to die like every alpha before me." The honesty in his voice startled her, raw beneath its careful control. For the first time since arriving in Blackridge, Illyra saw not the cold alpha the pack feared, but a man carrying a weight far heavier than anyone around him understood. "Then let us prove the prophecy right," she said softly. "Not because we owe each other affection, but because your pack deserves a future, and so do you." Cade studied her for a long moment, something unreadable shifting behind his amber eyes. He did not smile, did not soften entirely, but the tension in his shoulders eased, just slightly, and that small change felt like the first real bridge built between them since the wedding. "Very well," he said finally. "Partners then, nothing more." "Nothing more," Illyra agreed, though something in her chest already whispered that promise might prove harder to keep than either of them expected. Neither of them noticed the folded piece of parchment tucked deep within one of the study's locked drawers, hidden beneath decades of dust, waiting silently for the day someone finally found the courage to read it, and with it, the true, dangerous origin of the curse, threatening everything they were both determined to save. A scream tore through the fortress before dawn, sharp enough to pull Illyra from sleep with her heart already racing. She was out of bed, and into the hallway, before she fully registered moving. Bare feet cold against stone, the sound of running footsteps echoing from every direction. Warriors rushed past her toward the northern wall, faces tight with alarm, and somewhere beyond the fortress gates, wolves howled in a pattern she recognized instantly as a warning call. Cade's door burst open at the same moment, and he emerged already half-shifted, eyes glowing amber, jaw set with the kind of focus that made him look less like a husband and more like the alpha his pack depended on. "Stay inside," he said, not even glancing at her as he moved past. "What is happening?" Illyra demanded, following despite the order. "Rival scouts near the border," he said. "Possibly the same pack that ambushed your carriage. Stay inside, Illyra. I mean it." For once, she did not argue, though it had nothing to do with obedience, and everything to do with recognizing that she would only slow down warriors trained for exactly this kind of danger. She retreated to the window instead, watching as Cade and a dozen fighters disappeared into the tree line, torches bobbing like fireflies swallowed by darkness. The waiting was worse than she expected. Minutes stretched into what felt like hours, the fortress unnervingly quiet except for the occasional distant howl, until finally the warriors returned, just as the sky began to lighten with the first gray hint of dawn. Illyra was already in the courtyard when they arrived, unable to stay hidden away any longer, and her stomach dropped at the sight of blood staining several tunics, warriors limping. One young fighter being carried between two others, his leg twisted at an unnatural angle. She did not think. She simply moved. "Bring him inside," she said, already directing warriors toward the healing hall, with an authority that surprised even her. "Isolde, I need clean cloth and the willow bark tincture. Someone bring water, now." For a moment, no one moved, startled by the command in her voice. Then Isolde appeared at her side, nodding sharply, and the fortress snapped into motion around them. Cade watched from a few paces away, breathing hard, a shallow cut along his forearm forgotten, as he observed Alira work with steady, practiced hands, calming the injured fighter with a low, soothing voice, even as she assessed the damage to his leg. "It is not broken cleanly," she said after a careful examination. "But it needs to be set properly, or he will limp for the rest of his life." "Do it," Cade said quietly. Alira glanced up at him, surprised by the trust in those two words, then nodded and got to work, guiding Isolde through the process with a calm precision that left the older healer visibly impressed despite the tension of the moment. By the time the sun had fully risen, the injured fighter was resting comfortably, his leg properly set and wrapped, color returning to his face. Alira sat back on her heels, exhausted, hands stained with dried blood, and for the first time since arriving in Blackridge, she felt something close to belonging settle into her chest. Cade found her there, alone in the healing hall, the rest of the wounded already tended and resting. He leaned against the doorway, watching her with an expression she had not seen from him before, something almost like wonder, quickly hidden beneath his usual guarded calm. "You did not have to do that," he said. "Yes," Alira said simply, wiping her hands on a clean cloth. "I did." He studied her for a long moment, then crossed the room and sat down across from her, close enough that she could see the exhaustion carved into his features, the faint tremor in his hands from the fight, still fading from his blood. "The scouts were from the Ravenshade pack," he said quietly, "the same pack, I believe, that attacked your carriage before the wedding." Alira's chest tightened. "Do you know why?" "Not yet," Cade admitted, "but it is too coordinated to be coincidence. Someone wanted you dead before you ever reached Blackridge, and now they are testing our defenses directly. I do not like the timing." "You think it is connected to the curse," Alira said, understanding dawning slowly. "I think," Cade said carefully, "that very few people outside this fortress knew the details of our marriage arrangement, and I intend to find out exactly how the Ravenshade pack learned of it." Silence settled between them, comfortable in a way it had not been before. Two people bound not by affection, but by a growing, cautious respect neither of them had expected to feel this soon. "Thank you," Cade said finally, the words clearly unfamiliar in his mouth, "for what you did tonight." Alira allowed herself a small, tired smile. "We agreed to be partners. This is what partners do." Something shifted in his expression at that, subtle but unmistakable, and for the briefest moment, the distance between them felt smaller than it had since the day she arrived. Over the following days, whispers about Alira changed shape throughout Blackridge. She was no longer simply the fragile outsider bride shoved into an unwanted marriage. She was the woman who had steadied a bleeding fighter's leg with her own hands, who had stayed calm while chaos surrounded her, who had earned, however cautiously, the beginning of the pack's trust. Garrick remained unconvinced, watching her with narrowed eyes whenever their paths crossed, but even he could not deny the shift in the fortress's mood. Sable chattered excitedly about the change, delighted to finally have good news to share while braiding Alira's hair each morning. Even Marin, sharp-tongued and difficult to impress, began seeking Alira out during meals, testing her with pointed questions about pack politics, nodding slowly whenever her answers proved sharper than expected. Alira used the growing trust wisely, spending her free hours in the fortress library rather than resting, poring over old texts and pack records whenever she could find them, searching quietly for any mention of the curse's true origin. Most of what she found was frustratingly vague, old stories twisted through generations of retelling, prophecy blended so thoroughly with legend that separating fact from fiction felt nearly impossible. But one evening, tucked between unrelated ledgers in a dusty corner of the library, she found a single page that made her blood run cold. It was a fragment of an old letter, written in faded ink, describing a betrayal generations ago involving an Omega woman cast out from Blackridge after a broken promise, cursed by grief and fury, to bind the Thornwood bloodline to an early, violent end, unless balanced by true devotion freely given. The name at the bottom of the fragment was smudged beyond recognition, but the surname attached to it made Alira's stomach twist with unease. Voss. Her own family name. She stared at the fragment for a long time, heart pounding, mind racing through implications she was not yet ready to fully accept. It could be coincidence. Voss was not an uncommon name among Omega bloodlines. It did not have to mean what the cold dread in her chest was already insisting it meant. She told herself that firmly, folding the fragment carefully into her sleeve rather than leaving it behind, and resolved to keep searching before drawing conclusions that could shatter everything she had begun building in Blackridge. But that night, lying awake long after the fortress had gone quiet, she could not shake the feeling that she had just found the first thread of a truth far larger and far more dangerous than anyone in Blackridge yet understood. Outside her window, the wind carried a low, mournful howl through the mountains, distant and unfamiliar, as though the forest itself were trying to warn her of what was still to come. Word of the attack near the border spread quickly through the villages surrounding Blackridge, and within days, Cade decided it was time for Alira to see more of the territory she now called home, both to reassure the pack and to keep watchful eyes on the roads leading toward Ravenshade land. The village nestled at the base of the mountain was smaller than Alira expected, a cluster of wooden houses and busy market stalls tucked between towering pines. Children ran between vendors, dogs barked at passing carts, and the smell of fresh bread mixed with wood smoke in a way that reminded her painfully of home. She rode beside Cade in comfortable silence for most of the journey, watching the landscape shift from dense forest to open farmland, until a young voice called out from near the market square. "Alpha! Alpha! Is it true you married an Omega who talks to wolves?" Cade's mouth twitched, the closest thing to amusement Alira had seen from him in public. "Where did you hear that?" The boy, no older than 8, shrugged with the careless confidence of childhood. "Everyone is saying it. They say she calmed the whole northern wall with just her voice." "I did no such thing," Alira said, crouching slightly to meet the boy's eyes. "I simply helped bandage a friend of mine. Nothing magical about that." The boy looked openly disappointed, though he brightened again quickly, tugging at her sleeve to show her a wooden carving he had made, a crude but earnest attempt at a wolf mid-howl. Alira praised it warmly, and for a moment, surrounded by the noise and color of the village, she almost forgot the weight of everything waiting for her back at the fortress. That peace did not last long. A commotion near the edge of the market pulled their attention, raised voices, and the sharp sound of something breaking. Cade moved instantly, cutting through the crowd with Alira close behind, and they arrived to find a merchant cowering behind his overturned cart, while a broad, heavily built pack member loomed over him, fists clenched. "You think you can cheat me and get away with it?" the man snarled. "I did nothing wrong," the merchant stammered, clearly terrified. "The price was fair, I swear it." "Kest," Cade said sharply, stepping forward. "Enough." The man Kest turned with a flash of anger that faded quickly into wary submission the moment he registered his Alpha's presence. "He shorted me on grain, Alpha. I was simply asking for what I was owed." "By breaking his cart," Cade said coldly. "Step back." Kest obeyed, though his glare shifted pointedly toward Alira, sizing her up with open disdain. "Bringing your little Omega bride to watch pack business now? Careful, Alpha. Some things are not meant for soft hands." The words landed with clear intent to provoke, and Alira felt the familiar flare of frustration rise in her chest, though she kept her expression carefully neutral. Before Cade could respond, she stepped forward instead, meeting Kest's gaze directly. "Soft hands set broken bones just as well as hard fists break them," she said evenly. "If you would like to test whose hands serve this pack better, I am happy to demonstrate on your next injury." A ripple of surprised laughter moved through the small crowd that had gathered, and Kest's face flushed with embarrassment, unable to find a sharp enough retort. He grumbled something under his breath and stalked away, leaving the merchant fumbling gratefully over his overturned cart. Cade said nothing as they helped right the cart and gather the scattered grain, but Alira noticed the way his gaze lingered on her afterward, something unreadable, but distinctly less guarded than before. "You did not need to defend yourself like that. he said, once they were riding back toward the fortress. I have been defending myself my whole life, Alira replied. I am not going to stop simply because I now live behind stronger walls. Cade was quiet for a long moment, the only sound the steady rhythm of hooves against the dirt road. My father used to say, he said finally, that a pack is only as strong as the people it protects, not simply the warriors who fight for it. I did not fully understand what he meant until recently. Alira glanced at him, surprised by the openness in his tone. And now? Now, Cade said. I am beginning to understand it very well. It was the closest thing to a compliment he had offered her since the wedding, and though neither of them acknowledged it directly, something between them shifted a little further that day, small but undeniable, like the first crack of ice beginning to thaw beneath a long, cold winter. Back at the fortress, however, not everyone welcomed the growing warmth between their alpha and his bride. Garrick found Alira alone that evening near the eastern garden, arms crossed, expression carefully neutral, in a way that did not fully hide his disapproval. The pack is starting to trust you, he said without preamble. Is that a problem? Alira asked. It could be, Garrick said. Trust given too quickly is often trust misplaced. I have seen this pack suffer enough already. I will not stand by and watch it suffer again, because everyone was too charmed by a healer's hands to ask harder questions. What questions would those be? Alira asked, keeping her voice level despite the challenge in his tone. Where you truly come from, Garrick said. Why the Ravenshade pack wanted you dead before you even arrived. Whether this marriage is truly meant to save Blackridge, or simply delay whatever is coming for it. The words struck closer to her recent discovery in the library than Garrick could possibly know, and Alira fought to keep her expression steady despite the unease curling through her chest. I do not have all the answers you want, she said honestly, but I intend to find them, for my own sake as much as yours. If something dangerous is coming, I would rather face it with clear eyes than hide from questions out of fear. Garrick studied her for a long moment, something in his rigid posture easing slightly, though his caution remained fully intact. See that you do, he said finally, before turning and walking away without another word. Alira remained in the garden long after he left, staring up at the darkening sky, the weight of everything she had learned pressing heavily against her chest. She had not yet told Cade about the fragment she found in the library, uncertain how to explain a discovery that might implicate her own bloodline in the very curse she had come to help break. She decided, finally, that she needed more information before bringing it to him, more certainty, before risking the fragile trust they had only just begun to build. Rushing to a conclusion built on a single smudged name felt reckless, especially when so much still remained uncertain. Instead, she resolved to dig deeper, quietly and carefully, searching every record Blackridge possessed for answers about the true origin of the curse, and about her own family's forgotten connection to a fortress she had never once visited before her wedding day. Days blurred together in careful, deliberate research, stolen hours in the library between her growing responsibilities within the pack. She learned to read the old dialect used in the fortress's earliest records, painstakingly translating fragments of history that most of Blackridge had long since forgotten or chosen not to remember. What she found painted a picture far more complicated than simple prophecy. The Thornwood curse, it seemed, had never been a single clean event, but rather a slow unraveling, caused by broken promises stretching back generations, tangled with old alliances between packs, betrayed love, and a bloodline of Omegas who had once held far more power and respect than the current generation seemed to remember. One evening, exhausted from hours of reading, Alira nearly missed the soft knock at the library door, until it repeated, firmer this time. Cade stepped inside, glancing around at the scattered books and papers with mild surprise. Sable said I might find you here. Again. I did not realize you were keeping track, Alira said, quickly gathering the loose fragment she had been examining and tucking it beneath a stack of unrelated ledgers, unwilling to reveal her suspicions until she had something more concrete to share. Cade's gaze lingered on the movement, curious but not yet suspicious. The pack has noticed your interest in our history, he said. Marin finds it encouraging. Garrick finds it concerning. I find myself somewhere in between. And where exactly is in between? Alira asked, unable to help the small smile tugging at her lips despite her exhaustion. Cade considered the question seriously, something he rarely did with lighter conversation. "Curious," he said finally, "about what exactly you are searching for so late into every evening." Elira hesitated, torn between honesty and caution, before choosing a careful middle ground. "I want to understand the curse fully," she said. "Not simply the prophecy that brought me here, but its true beginning. I think there may be pieces of the story Blackridge has forgotten, or perhaps chosen to forget." Something shifted behind Cade's amber eyes, thoughtful rather than defensive. "My father believed something similar," he admitted quietly. "He spent years searching these same records before he died. He never found the answers he was looking for." "Perhaps," Elira said gently. "He was not looking in quite the right places." Cade studied her for a long moment, and for the first time since her arrival, Elira saw something close to genuine warmth flicker across his guarded expression. "Perhaps," he agreed. "Show me what you have found. All of it." Elira's chest tightened with hesitation, the fragment bearing her family name still hidden beneath the stack of ledgers between them. She was not ready to share that piece yet, not until she understood its full meaning, not until she was certain it would not shatter the fragile trust they had only just begun to build. "Soon," she said instead. "I want to be certain before I bring you half-formed theories, built on incomplete history." Cade nodded slowly, accepting her answer without pushing further, though the curiosity in his gaze did not fully fade. "Very well," he said. "But do not wait too long, Elira. Whatever this curse truly is, it will not wait patiently for either of us to find comfortable timing." Long after he left the library that night, Elira remained seated among the scattered records, staring at the smudged names still hidden beneath layers of forgotten history, and wondered, with growing unease, exactly how much longer she could keep searching before the truth found its own way to the surface, whether she was ready for it or not. The first strange thing happened in the garden, so small that Elira almost dismissed it entirely. She had taken to tending a small patch of neglected soil near the eastern wall, more out of habit than purpose, the same way she used to help her mother grow herbs back home. The plants there had been withered and forgotten for years, choked by weeds and hard, dry earth. Within 2 weeks of her quiet care, the entire patch bloomed with color, flowers that had no business surviving the mountain's harsh climate, suddenly thriving, as though spring had arrived early, just for that single corner of the fortress. Sable noticed it first, gasping in delight as she passed by one morning. "How did you manage this? Old Torin has tried growing anything here for years, and failed every single time." "I simply watered it," Elira said, though even she found the sudden bloom slightly unsettling. Cade noticed next, pausing mid-stride one evening as he crossed the courtyard, staring at the unexpected burst of color glowing faintly in the fading light. His wolf stirred beneath his skin, restless and strangely calm at the same time, a contradiction he could not quite explain. He told himself it meant nothing, that gardens sometimes simply grew well with proper attention, but the small, nagging unease refused to fully settle. It was not the only strange occurrence. The fortress's hunting hounds, normally wary and standoffish with strangers, had taken to following Elira through the halls with quiet, unwavering loyalty, tails wagging gently whenever she passed, ears perking at the sound of her voice from rooms away. Even Cade's own personal guard wolf, a massive gray animal named Fen who answered to no one but his alpha, had begun seeking Elira out during her evening walks, pressing close against her side, as though offering silent protection. "He does not do that," Cade said one evening, watching with open confusion as Fen settled contentedly at Elira's feet during dinner. "He barely tolerates most of the pack." "Perhaps he simply likes me," Elira offered, though the same quiet unease Cade felt had begun settling into her chest as well. "Perhaps," Cade said slowly, though his tone made it clear he did not fully believe the simple explanation either. That night, unable to sleep, Cade found himself standing outside her door, for far longer than he intended, listening to the quiet sounds of her sleep through the thin wood. His wolf oddly settled in a way it rarely was anymore. He thought of his father's restless years, searching for answers about the curse, of the strange, unexplainable pull he now felt whenever Elira was near, and wondered, uneasily, whether the old prophecy might be more literal than he had ever allowed himself to believe. He did not yet understand the full shape of what was happening. He only knew, with growing certainty, that something about his new wife defied simple explanation, and that ignoring it would not make the truth disappear. The following days brought them closer together, in ways neither had fully anticipated. Cade began seeking Alira out deliberately, rather than simply crossing paths by circumstance, joining her during quiet evening walks along the fortress walls, asking careful questions about her life before Blackridge that she answered honestly, piece by piece, until the picture of her childhood became clearer than he had expected it to be. She told him about her brother's illness, about the empty grain stores that had forced her father's hand, about years spent learning to heal, because her small pack could not always afford proper medicine. Cade listened more closely than he had listened to anyone in a long time, and slowly, carefully, he began sharing pieces of his own past in return. The weight of losing his father young, the pressure of leading a pack terrified of a curse he did not fully understand, the loneliness of being an alpha everyone needed but few truly understood. "I did not expect this," Cade admitted one evening, staring out over the darkening tree line as they stood together along the fortress wall. "Expect what?" Alira asked. "To find myself actually wanting to talk to you," he said, the honesty clearly costing him something, though he did not look away from her when he said it. Alira felt warmth spread through her chest, despite her best efforts to remain guarded. "I did not expect it either," she admitted. "I thought I would spend this marriage as a stranger under your roof, tolerated rather than truly seen." "You are not a stranger anymore," Cade said quietly. "I am not certain what you are instead, but it is not that." The moment stretched between them, charged with something neither of them was fully ready to name, until a sudden gust of wind swept through the courtyard below, carrying with it the distant, mournful howl of wolves that did not belong to Blackridge. Cade's expression shifted instantly, guarded focus replacing the softness of moments before. "Ravenshade scouts again," he said grimly, closer than before. The tension of the moment shattered, replaced by the familiar weight of danger, pressing against the fragile peace they had only just begun to build. Cade excused himself quickly to organize the fortress's defenses, leaving Alira alone on the wall, staring out at the dark tree line with her heart still pounding from the conversation they had just shared. She thought again of the smudged name hidden in the library, of the growing unease surrounding the strange occurrences she could not fully explain, and wondered, with a chill settling deep in her chest, whether the two mysteries were somehow connected in ways she was not yet ready to face. That fear only deepened 3 nights later, when a strange dream pulled her from sleep, vivid and unsettling, in a way no ordinary nightmare had ever been. She saw a woman standing in a moonlit clearing, dressed in old-fashioned robes, tears streaming down her face as she pressed her palm against the bark of an ancient tree, whispering words Alira could not fully understand, though the pain in her voice needed no translation. The woman turned suddenly in the dream, meeting Alira's eyes directly, and for one terrifying, impossible moment, Alira recognized something painfully familiar in her own reflection, staring back through the stranger's face. She woke gasping, heart pounding, drenched in a cold sweat despite the chill of the night air. Sleep did not return easily after that, and long before dawn, she found herself back in the library, searching more frantically than before through the oldest, most forgotten records Blackridge possessed. It was there, hours later, exhausted and trembling with a mixture of exhaustion and dread, that she finally found a second fragment, this one more complete than the first, describing the betrayed Omega woman by name. Ren Voss. Alira sat frozen, staring at the name until the letters blurred together, the fragile hope she had been clinging to finally shattering beneath the weight of undeniable truth. The curse was not simply connected to her bloodline by distant coincidence. It was born from it, generations ago, by a woman who shared her family name, and, quite possibly, far more than that. She did not yet understand the full shape of what this meant, whether it made her the key to breaking the curse, or something far more dangerous entirely. But she understood, with sudden painful clarity, that the growing warmth between herself and Cade now stood on ground, far more fragile than either of them realized, built upon a truth she was terrified to reveal, and equally terrified to keep hidden any longer. Outside the library window, dawn broke slowly over the mountains, painting the sky in soft shades of gold, indifferent to the storm quietly gathering within the walls of Blackridge, and within the fragile, uncertain heart of the woman determined to face it. The warning bell rang out just after midday, sharp and urgent, sending the entire fortress into immediate motion. Elira dropped the basket of herbs she had been sorting and rushed toward the courtyard, joining the flood of pack members moving toward the walls. Word spread quickly through the chaos. A large Ravenshade force had been spotted moving through the eastern forest, far larger than any scouting party seen before, clearly intent on more than simple observation this time. Cade stood at the center of the courtyard, already directing warriors into formation, with sharp, precise commands, his usual guarded calm replaced by focused urgency. When his eyes found Elira in the crowd, something flickered across his face, worry, quickly buried beneath necessity. "Inside the healing hall," he said firmly. "Now." "I can help," Elira said. "I know you can," Cade said, gripping her shoulders briefly, his touch startlingly gentle, despite the tension radiating from him. "That is exactly why I need you safe, and ready to treat whoever comes back wounded." "Please, Elira." The please, quiet and uncharacteristic, convinced her more than any command could have. She nodded and hurried toward the healing hall, gathering supplies alongside Isolde and Sable, preparing for whatever the coming hours would bring. The attack, when it came, was brutal and fast, the clash of warriors echoing from the eastern wall as Blackridge fighters met the Ravenshade force head-on. Elira stood ready in the healing hall, hands steady despite her racing heart, and within the hour, the first wounded began arriving, carried in by exhausted, blood-streaked warriors. She worked without pause, directing supplies, stitching wounds, calming panicked fighters, with the same steady voice she had used since her very first day in Blackridge. Isolde worked beside her, impressed, despite the chaos, by how naturally Elira commanded the space, never once flinching from the severity of the injuries brought before her. Hours passed in a blur of urgent work, until finally, as dusk began to settle over the fortress, the fighting outside quieted. Cade returned last, favoring one side slightly, a deep cut along his ribs that he clearly intended to ignore, in favor of checking on his pack first. "Sit," Elira said the moment she spotted him, her tone leaving no room for argument. "I am fine," Cade said, though the tightness in his voice betrayed the lie. "Sit," she repeated, already pulling supplies toward her, "or I will have Isolde hold you down, while I stitch this myself." Something close to a smile tugged at the corner of Cade's mouth, despite the exhaustion etched into his features, and he obeyed, settling onto the nearest bench while Elira carefully examined the wound along his ribs. "It is deep," she said, focusing on cleaning the injury with practiced efficiency. "You are lucky it did not go deeper." "I have had worse," Cade said. "That is not comforting," Elira replied, though her hands remained steady despite the worry tightening in her chest. She worked in silence for a while, stitching the wound carefully, while Cade watched her with quiet, unguarded attention, exhaustion loosening the careful walls he usually kept firmly in place. "You did well today," he said finally. The pack noticed. "I noticed." "I only did what needed to be done," Elira said, echoing words she had spoken to him weeks before, though the weight behind them felt different now, heavier, more sincere. "That is exactly why it mattered," Cade said quietly. When the stitching was finished, neither of them moved immediately, the healing hall quiet around them, most of the wounded finally resting peacefully. Cade studied her for a long moment, something vulnerable breaking through his usual composure. "My brothers," he said suddenly, the words clearly unplanned, surprising even himself. "I had two, once, both older than me, both gone before their 30th year, taken by the same curse that killed my father. I was never supposed to become Alpha. I was the youngest, the one nobody expected to survive long enough to matter." Elira's chest tightened at the rawness in his voice. "Cade, you do not have to." "I want to," he said, meeting her eyes directly. "I have spent years pretending their deaths did not still shape every decision I make. But watching you today, seeing how easily you saved lives without hesitation, I found myself thinking of them for the first time in a long while, without that familiar weight of anger attached to the memory." "What do you feel instead?" Elira asked softly. "Hope," Cade admitted, the word clearly unfamiliar and uncomfortable in his mouth. "Which terrifies me more than I would like to admit." The honesty between them settled into something quiet and fragile, neither romantic confession nor simple gratitude, but something deeper, built slowly through shared danger and steady trust. Alira reached out instinctively, resting her hand gently over his uninjured side, and Cade did not pull away. Hope is not something to fear, she said softly. Perhaps not, Cade said, but it is something I have not allowed myself in a very long time. They remained there together long after the healing hall quieted fully, the fragile beginning of something neither of them fully understood, settling comfortably between them for the first time since the wedding that had bound them together as strangers. The following morning brought a different kind of tension, as warriors delivered a captured Ravenshade scout to the fortress, wounded but alive, dragged before Cade and his council for questioning. Alira watched from the edge of the great hall, unable to look away, as Cade approached the prisoner with cold, controlled authority. "Why does your alpha want my wife dead?" Cade demanded. The scout, young and clearly terrified despite his attempts at defiance, hesitated before finally speaking. "It is not about her," he said. "It is about what she represents. Our elders speak of an old prophecy, one that claims the Thornwood curse can only end through a bloodline connected to betrayal generations old. If that prophecy is true, ending the curse would make Blackridge stronger than any pack in these mountains. Our alpha will not allow that. So he sent assassins to kill an innocent woman rather than risk peace," Cade said, voice low and dangerous. "Peace was never his intention," the scout said quietly. "Power was." Cade's jaw tightened, fury simmering just beneath his controlled exterior, though he did not act rashly, ordering the scout held securely, rather than harmed further. When he finally turned back toward Alira, something fierce and protective burned in his amber eyes. "They will not touch you," he said, voice low enough that only she could hear. "Whatever this prophecy truly means, I will not let it cost you your life." Alira's chest ached with an emotion she was not yet ready to name. Gratitude, tangled tightly with fear, knowing the full truth she still had not revealed to him. The scout's words about betrayal and bloodline echoed uncomfortably close to the fragments she had discovered in the library, the smudged names she had not yet found the courage to share. She realized, standing there in the tense quiet of the great hall, that she could not keep the truth hidden much longer. Not when Ravenshade already seemed to understand more about the prophecy's true nature than Blackridge itself did. That evening, as the fortress finally settled into uneasy calm, Alira found Cade alone in his study once more, staring into the fire with the exhausted weight of leadership heavy across his shoulders. She hesitated only a moment before stepping inside, the folded fragment from the library finally clutched firmly in her hand. "There is something I need to show you," she said quietly. "Something I found weeks ago, and should have shared with you sooner." Cade turned toward her, expression shifting from exhaustion to careful attention. "Alira, whatever it is, you can trust me with it." She crossed the room slowly, heart pounding, and placed the fragile, faded fragment into his open hand. "I am not certain what it means yet," she said softly, "but I think it might explain far more about this curse than either of us has been willing to consider." Cade's eyes moved slowly across the faded ink, and Alira watched, breath held tightly in her chest, as understanding began settling heavily across his features, the fragile trust between them now balanced precariously, on the edge of a truth neither of them was fully prepared to face. Cade read the fragment twice, before finally lowering it, his expression difficult to read in the flickering firelight. "Ren Voss," he said slowly, testing the name aloud. "The same surname as yours." "I know," Alira said, bracing herself for anger, for suspicion, for any of the reactions she had feared since first finding the fragment weeks ago. "It could be coincidence. Voss is not an uncommon name." "It could be," Cade agreed, though his tone made it clear he did not fully believe that either. He studied the faded ink again, brow furrowed in careful thought rather than accusation. "This fragment is incomplete. It mentions betrayal, and a curse born from grief, but nothing about direct lineage. Nothing that confirms you are connected to this woman beyond a shared name, separated by generations." Relief loosened some of the tension in Alira's chest, though unease still lingered beneath it. "I did not want to hide it from you," she said. "I simply did not want to bring you half-formed fear before I understood it fully myself." Cade set the fragment down carefully on his desk, meeting her eyes with an openness that surprised her. "Thank you for trusting me with it now," he said. "We will find the rest of the story together, whatever it turns out to mean." The word "together" settled warmly in her chest, a promise neither of them had expected to make so easily, just weeks after a marriage built entirely on obligation. In the days that followed, their search deepened, hours spent together in the library poring over faded records, cross-referencing old family trees, piecing together fragments of a history Blackridge had clearly worked hard to bury. They found no immediate confirmation linking Alira directly to Ren Voss, only tantalizing hints. A shared surname here, a mention of an Omega line scattered across distant villages there, nothing definitive enough to draw firm conclusions. The uncertainty, strangely, brought them closer rather than driving them apart. Working side by side through quiet evenings, shoulders brushing over old parchment, voices low as they debated interpretations of ancient handwriting, Alira found herself laughing more freely than she had in years, and Cade, for his part, seemed to relax more fully than his pack had ever witnessed. "You are different when you are not performing the role of alpha," Alira observed one evening, watching him frown thoughtfully over a particularly stubborn passage of old script. "Performing," Cade repeated, glancing up with a raised eyebrow. "Is that what you think I do?" "I think," Alira said carefully, "that leading a pack terrified of a curse requires a certain mask. I do not think that mask shows very much of who you actually are." Cade set down the parchment slowly, studying her with an intensity that made her pulse quicken. "And who do you think I actually am?" "Someone who cares more deeply than he lets anyone see," Alira said softly. "Someone who has spent so long protecting others that he forgot to let anyone protect him in return." For a long moment, Cade said nothing, the fire crackling softly between them. Then, slowly, he reached out and gently tucked a loose strand of hair behind her ear, his touch lingering far longer than necessary. "You see me more clearly than anyone has in a long time," he said quietly. "Perhaps," Alira said, her voice barely above a whisper, "that is because I am actually looking." The moment stretched between them, warm and fragile, until Cade closed the small distance separating them, and pressed his lips gently against hers. It was soft, careful, nothing like the cold indifference that had defined their wedding day, and Alira melted into it without hesitation, months of careful distance finally dissolving into something neither of them could fully deny any longer. When they finally parted, Cade rested his forehead gently against hers, breathing unsteady. "This was not part of our arrangement," he murmured. "No," Alira agreed, smiling softly despite the pounding of her heart. "It was not." "Do you regret it?" he asked. "No," she said simply. "Do you?" Cade's answer was another gentle kiss, slower this time, filled with a tenderness that answered her question far more clearly than words ever could. Word of the shift between them spread quickly through Blackridge, whispered rumors passing from warrior to warrior, from kitchen to training yard, until the entire fortress seemed to buzz with quiet speculation. Some claimed the Omega bride was slowly softening their fierce alpha, taming the sharp edges grief and duty had carved into him over the years. Others whispered something stranger, that her presence alone seemed to be purifying something deep within the pack's bloodline, pointing toward the sudden, inexplicable blooming garden, the loyal hounds, the strange calm that had settled over the fortress since her arrival. Marin, ever perceptive, brought the rumors directly to Alira one afternoon, while they shared tea in the fortress's smaller sitting room. "The pack believes you are healing something ancient within Blackridge," Marin said, studying Alira over the rim of her cup. "Do you believe that yourself?" "I do not know what to believe," Alira admitted honestly. "I only know that everything feels different since I arrived, and I do not yet understand why." "Perhaps," Marin said thoughtfully, "the why does not matter as much as the outcome. My nephew has not smiled this freely in years. Whatever you are doing, child, do not stop." The warmth of Marin's approval settled comfortably alongside the fragile hope blooming steadily in Alira's chest. For the first time since arriving in Blackridge, she allowed herself to imagine a future beyond survival, beyond simple obligation, a future where the curse might truly end, where she and Cade might build something real from the ashes of an arrangement neither of them had originally wanted. She did not yet understand the dangerous irony hidden within that hope, that the very warmth blooming between them, the very peace settling over Blackridge, was not evidence of the curse weakening, but rather evidence of something far more complicated stirring beneath the surface, drawn steadily closer to its true, long-delayed completion. With every passing day she remained within the fortress walls. That night, Lying peacefully beside Cade for the first time since their wedding, Elira slept without dreams, without warning, unaware that the quiet calm she had finally found was merely the stillness before a storm neither of them had any way of preparing for. The letter arrived on an ordinary afternoon, tucked among routine correspondence from a neighboring village, and it changed everything. Elira recognized her mother's handwriting immediately, though the words within made her chest tighten with a mixture of confusion and dread. Her mother wrote of a distant relative she had never mentioned before, an old aunt who had passed away years earlier, leaving behind a small collection of family heirlooms that had only recently been discovered in storage. Among them was a journal, old and fragile, bearing a name that had puzzled her mother enough to mention it directly. Ren Voss. Elira's hands trembled as she read the words a second time, then a third, disbelief slowly giving way to a cold, creeping certainty. She requested the journal be sent immediately, and the agonizing week she spent waiting for its arrival stretched longer than any week she had endured since coming to Blackridge. When it finally arrived, delivered by a tired courier late one evening, Elira retreated immediately to the privacy of the library, hands shaking as she carefully opened the fragile, leather-bound journal for the first time. The handwriting inside matched the fragments she had already found, confirming immediately that Ren Voss was not simply a distant, unrelated name lost to history. She was, according to careful genealogy recorded within the journal's early pages, Elira's own great-great-grandmother, a direct ancestor whose story had clearly been deliberately erased from family memory for generations. Elira read through the night, unable to stop despite the growing horror settling into her chest with every page. Ren Voss had once loved an alpha of the Thornwood bloodline, generations before Cade's birth, a love the pack's council had ultimately forbidden, deeming an Omega from a struggling outside pack unworthy of joining their powerful line. Ren had been cast out cruelly, publicly humiliated before the entire pack, her heart broken not simply by rejection, but by the deliberate, calculated betrayal of promises made to her in private and denied entirely in public. In her grief and fury, standing alone in a forest clearing, much like the one Elira had seen in her strange, unsettling dream, Ren had called upon old, forbidden magic passed down through her own Omega bloodline, magic tied not to malice exactly, but to raw, uncontrolled sorrow given form and purpose. She had bound the Thornwood bloodline to her own descendants, ensuring that no alpha of that line could ever find lasting peace or long life unless bound completely, freely, and truly to an Omega of her own blood, a mirror of the love she herself had been denied. But the journal's final pages revealed something far more devastating than the curse's origin alone. The binding, Ren had written with clear, aching regret before her death, was not simply broken by marriage or by simple affection. It required something the desperate elders of her own time had misunderstood entirely, a complete, willing sacrifice of power, freely given, between both bloodlines, an exchange rather than a rescue. Until that true exchange occurred, every Omega of her bloodline who entered the Thornwood family, whether through marriage, alliance, or simple presence within their territory, would only feed the curse further, drawing strength from proximity, rather than weakening it, the very presence of her descendants, unknowingly deepening the wound, with every generation that failed to understand the ritual required to properly close it. Elira sat frozen, long after finishing the final page, the journal trembling in her hands, horror washing over her in slow, suffocating waves. She was not simply connected to the curse by ancestry. She was, according to Ren's own careful, heartbroken writing, an active source feeding it, her very presence within Blackridge's walls, drawing the ancient magic tighter around Cade with every passing day, regardless of how much affection had grown between them. The blooming garden, the loyal hounds, the strange calm that had settled over the fortress. She had believed, along with everyone else, that these were signs of healing, of the curse weakening beneath her presence. They were not signs of healing at all. They were signs of the curse strengthening, drawing power from her bloodline, exactly as it had for generations, disguised as peace, while quietly tightening its hold around the man she had, despite every intention to remain guarded, fallen completely and helplessly in love with. Tears blurred her vision as the full weight of the discovery settled into her chest. Every stolen kiss, every quiet evening spent together in the library, every moment of hope she had allowed herself to feel, had not been evidence of the curse ending. It had been evidence of it deepening, drawing closer to whatever devastating completion Ren's magic had been building toward for generations. She thought immediately of Cade's brothers, gone before their 30th year. His father, dead before 35. She thought of Cade himself, still young, still healthy, but bound now more tightly than ever to a curse she had unknowingly fed, simply by existing within his walls, by falling in love with him, exactly as Ren herself had once fallen in love, generations before. The realization struck her with sudden, sickening clarity. It was not enough to simply love Cade. Ren's own heartbreak had proven that love alone, without full understanding, without the true exchange the ritual required, only deepened the wound, rather than healing it. Illyra did not know what that true exchange truly required. The journal's final pages, damaged by age and water, ended abruptly, leaving the exact nature of the sacrifice frustratingly unclear. She only understood, with growing dread, that time was working against them now more urgently than ever, and that every day she remained silent about this discovery was another day the curse tightened its grip around the man she loved. She needed to tell Cade. 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 She needed to tell Cade, with painful clarity, exactly how this truth would sound to a man who had spent his entire life watching his bloodline die young because of a curse cast by her own ancestor. It would not matter that she had not known. It would not matter that her love for him was real, more real than anything she had felt in her entire life. All that would matter, in the raw, immediate aftermath of this revelation, was that the woman he had begun to trust, begun to love in return, carried within her the very bloodline responsible for generations of his family's suffering. She sat with the journal clutched tightly to her chest for a long time, torn between the desperate urge to protect the fragile happiness they had built together, and the equally desperate understanding that hiding the truth any longer would only make its eventual discovery more devastating. Finally, as dawn began breaking softly over the mountains outside the library window, Illyra made her decision. She would tell him. Tonight, regardless of how much it might cost her. She found him in the training yard hours later, sparring with Garrick in the crisp morning air, movements sharp and controlled despite the early hour. He noticed her immediately, something warm flickering across his expression, before concern quickly replaced it, clearly reading the exhaustion and distress written plainly across her face. "Illyra," he said, breaking away from the sparring match immediately, closing the distance between them with quick, purposeful strides. "What happened?" "I need to speak with you," she said, her voice trembling, despite her best efforts to remain steady. "Privately. Now, if you can." Cade studied her for a long moment, worry deepening in his amber eyes, before nodding sharply and leading her away from the yard, ignoring Garrick's curious, watchful gaze following them both. They walked in tense silence until they reached the privacy of his study, the same room where he had first shown genuine vulnerability, weeks earlier, where their fragile trust had first begun taking real shape. Illyra placed the journal carefully on his desk, hands still trembling. "I found something," she said softly. "Something I should have told you the moment I fully understood it. I am so sorry I did not come to you sooner." Cade's expression shifted slowly from confusion to careful attention as he opened the journal and began reading, the color slowly draining from his face with every passing page. Illyra watched him read in silence, her heart breaking a little more with each shift in his expression, each subtle tightening of his jaw. When he finally finished, he set the journal down with deliberate, controlled slowness, staring at it for a long, unbearable moment, before finally lifting his gaze to meet hers. "You knew," he said quietly, though the accusation beneath the calm was unmistakable. "How long have you known?" "I did not know the full truth until last night," Illyra said desperately. "Cade, please. I did not understand." "But you suspected," Cade interrupted, his voice hardening with every word. "Weeks ago, you found a fragment weeks ago bearing your family's name, and you told me it might mean nothing, that it was likely coincidence. I did not want to bring you fear built on incomplete information," Illyra said, tears finally breaking free, despite her best efforts to remain composed. "I wanted to be certain before." "Before what?" Cade demanded, the wounded fury in his voice cutting deeper than any blade. "Before you let me fall in love with you." Before I let myself believe, for the first time since my father's death, that this curse might actually be ending. The words struck her like a physical blow, the raw pain beneath his anger, far worse than the anger itself. I love you, she said desperately. And everything I have felt for you has been real, Cade. I swear it. I did not ask for this bloodline. I did not choose to be born into a story I never even knew existed until weeks ago. But you are the source, Cade said, his voice breaking slightly, despite his obvious effort to control it. Your very presence here has been feeding the very thing that killed my father, my brothers, every alpha before me, and I let myself believe you were the one meant to save me. I still might be, Elira said, though even she could hear the uncertainty trembling beneath her own words. The journal was not finished, Cade. There is a way to close this properly. A true exchange. Ren never had the chance to complete. We can still find it. We can still... How? Cade's voice rose sharply, raw and furious in a way she had never heard from him before, not even during the chaos of battle. How am I supposed to trust anything now, Elira? How am I supposed to know whether everything between us has been real, or simply the curse working exactly as it was designed to, drawing me closer to my own destruction disguised as love? The accusation landed with devastating force, and Elira felt something inside her chest crack painfully at the raw betrayal written across his face. A betrayal she understood completely, even as it shattered her. I do not know how to prove that to you, she said quietly, tears streaming freely now. I only know that I would rather lose everything between us than let you die not knowing the truth. If you need me to leave Blackridge to keep you safe, I will go. Tonight, if that is what you truly want. Cade said nothing for a long, agonizing moment, his jaw tight, his amber eyes bright with emotions he clearly could not fully name, even to himself. Finally he turned away from her, staring out the window at the mountains beyond, his voice barely above a whisper when he finally spoke again. I need time, he said. I need time to understand what any of this truly means. Please, Elira, just give me that. Heartbroken but unwilling to argue against a request so clearly reasonable given everything she had just revealed, Elira nodded silently, though he did not turn to see it, and slipped quietly from the study, leaving him alone with the shattered journal and the devastating weight of a truth neither of them had asked for, but both of them would now have to face. News of the rift between the Alpha and his bride spread through Blackridge within a single day, whispered carefully behind closed doors, the fortress's earlier warmth curdling quickly into uneasy tension. Elira kept mostly to her chambers, unable to face the curious, pitying glances that followed her whenever she ventured into the halls. Sable brought meals she barely touched, chattering softly in an attempt to fill the heavy silence, though even her cheerful optimism could not fully mask the worry etched into her young face. He will come around, Sable said gently one evening, setting down a tray of untouched food. The Alpha does not make quick decisions about things that matter most to him. This is not a small thing to come around on, Elira said quietly, staring out the window at the same mountains she had once found beautiful, now feeling only heavy and distant. I carry the very thing that has killed his entire family for generations. You also carry the thing that might finally end it, Sable said firmly. Do not forget that part, my lady. Elira offered a weak, grateful smile, though the ache in her chest refused to ease. She had not seen Cade since their conversation in his study, though she knew from Marin, who visited briefly each day with careful, measured updates, that he had thrown himself entirely into pack business, training with an intensity bordering on recklessness, avoiding anything that might force him to sit still long enough to feel the full weight of what he had learned. Garrick, unsurprisingly, made his own opinion known within days, cornering Elira near the garden with barely restrained anger. I warned him, he said, voice tight with fury. I told him, trust given too quickly often proves misplaced. I did not deceive him intentionally, Elira said, exhaustion making it difficult to summon her usual composure. I found the truth in pieces, Garrick, not all at once. Pieces or not, Garrick said, you knew enough weeks ago to raise concern, and you chose silence instead. Do you understand what that silence has cost this pack? Every day you remained quiet, the curse grew stronger. How many more days do we have now because of that choice? The words struck deeper than his anger alone could have. because Alira had already been asking herself the exact same question through countless sleepless nights. She had no answer to offer him, only the same heavy guilt she carried everywhere now. And Garrick, seeing no argument forthcoming, finally walked away without another word, leaving her alone once more with her thoughts. Marin found her there minutes later, having clearly witnessed at least part of the confrontation from a distance. She settled onto the garden bench beside Alira, without invitation, studying the still vibrant flowers that had bloomed so unexpectedly weeks earlier. Garrick is not wrong to be afraid, Marin said finally, but he is not entirely right either. How can he not be right? Alira asked bitterly. Everything he said is true. My silence may have cost Cade precious time. Fear rarely tells the full story, Marin said. You did not create this curse, child. You did not choose your bloodline any more than Cade chose his. The only true failure here would be allowing fear to stop you from finishing what you have already bravely started. Alira glanced at her, surprised by the steadiness of her support despite everything. You are not angry with me? I am worried, Marin corrected gently, for my nephew. But anger requires blaming someone for choices they made freely, and from what I understand, very little about your bloodline was ever a choice at all. The kindness in Marin's words eased some of the crushing guilt weighing on Alira's chest, though it did little to fill the aching absence of Cade's presence beside her. She spent the following days pouring herself entirely into research once more, determined to find the missing piece of Ren's unfinished ritual, desperate to offer Cade something more concrete than apologies and uncertain hope. She found Cade only once during that difficult stretch, passing him briefly in the fortress's main hall, as he returned from an exhausting patrol along the border. He looked thinner than before, shadows deep beneath his amber eyes, exhaustion carved into every line of his usually strong posture. He paused when he saw her, something unreadable flickering across his face, before he simply nodded once and continued past without a single word. The silence hurt more than anger would have. That night, unable to sleep, Alira wandered down to the library once more, drawn by desperate hope that fresh eyes might finally reveal something she had overlooked in Ren's damaged, incomplete journal. She pored over the final pages, again and again, searching for any hint, any clue, about the true nature of the sacrifice required to properly close the curse. It was well past midnight when she finally noticed something she had missed before, a faint, water-damaged symbol pressed into the leather binding itself, rather than written on the pages within, nearly invisible unless the light caught it at exactly the right angle. She traced it carefully with trembling fingers, recognizing the shape from something she had seen elsewhere in Blackridge's records, an old symbol associated with binding rituals long since fallen out of common practice. Her heart raced with cautious excitement as she searched further, cross-referencing the symbol against older texts, until she finally found a matching reference buried deep within one of the fortress's oldest, most neglected scrolls. The ritual described within was old and dangerous, requiring both parties to willingly offer a piece of their own power, freely and without coercion, binding not simply their fates, but the strength of their bloodlines together permanently. It was not a simple ceremony. It carried real risk, the scroll warned clearly. Danger to both participants should the exchange be attempted without complete, genuine willingness from both sides. A forced or hesitant exchange, the old text cautioned, could shatter both bloodlines entirely, rather than heal them, a risk far more devastating than the curse itself. Alira sat back slowly, the full weight of what she had found settling heavily across her shoulders. She finally understood exactly what Ren's unfinished ritual required. But completing it would mean asking Cade to trust her completely again, to offer something as significant and vulnerable as his own inherited strength. At the exact moment their fragile trust had been shattered, beyond what she knew how to fully repair. She did not know if he would ever agree to such a thing. She did not know if he could forgive her enough to try. But as dawn broke softly over the mountains once more, casting pale golden light across the ancient scroll still spread open before her, Alira understood with quiet, unshakable certainty exactly what she needed to do next, regardless of how frightening the prospect truly was. She needed to find Cade, and she needed to tell him everything, not simply the danger her bloodline represented, but the very real, very possible solution that could finally end it, if only he was willing to risk trusting her one final time. The collapse happened during morning training, sudden and terrifying enough that the entire courtyard fell silent within seconds. Illyra heard the commotion before she understood its cause, rushing toward the gathering crowd with her heart already pounding, fear coiling tight in her chest, before she even fully registered why. She pushed through the circle of stunned warriors and found Cade on the ground, pale and trembling, Garrick kneeling beside him with barely controlled panic written across his usually stern face. "Get Wessold," Illyra said immediately, dropping to her knees beside him. "Now." Cade's eyes fluttered open weakly, focusing on her with visible effort. "I am fine," he murmured, though the tremor in his voice betrayed how far from true that statement was. "You are not fine," Illyra said, checking his pulse with trembling hands, finding it dangerously fast and uneven beneath her fingers. "Cade, please, stay still." Isolde arrived moments later, her experienced hands moving quickly and efficiently as she examined him, though her expression grew increasingly troubled the longer her assessment continued. By the time they had moved him carefully into the healing hall, Illyra's fear had hardened into cold, unshakable certainty about exactly what was happening. "It is beginning," Isolde said quietly, once Cade had been settled and finally drifted into an uneasy, exhausted sleep. "The same symptoms his father showed before the end: weakness, irregular heartbeat, sudden collapse without warning." "That is not possible," Illyra said, panic rising sharply in her chest. "He is young. He is strong. The curse has never moved this quickly before." "The curse has never had this much to feed on before either," Isolde said gently, though the words landed like a blow regardless of her careful tone. "Whatever has shifted between the two of you these past weeks, child, it has clearly accelerated something neither of us fully understands." Illyra sat beside Cade's bed long into the evening, guilt and terror warring fiercely within her chest, watching the shallow rise and fall of his breathing with desperate, unwavering attention. She thought of Ren's own heartbroken words within the journal, of the danger inherent in loving deeply without completing the true exchange the ritual demanded. She understood now, with devastating clarity, exactly why the curse had begun accelerating so suddenly. Their love, real and undeniable as it was, had deepened the bond between their bloodlines, exactly as Ren's original curse intended, drawing them closer together emotionally, while the true ritual required to properly close that bond remained tragically unfinished. Every day they remained emotionally entangled, without completing the exchange, only tightened the curse further, exactly as it had for Ren's own broken heart generations before. Cade was not simply dying from an old curse working slowly across generations anymore. He was dying because their love, freely given but incomplete, had finally triggered the curse's true, devastating momentum. She could not wait any longer for him to forgive her in his own time. She understood that now with painful, urgent clarity. Whatever trust remained fractured between them, whatever anger still lingered beneath his exhaustion, she needed to find a way to reach him before the curse finished what it had started generations ago. Cade woke briefly near midnight, disoriented, but alert enough to recognize her still seated faithfully beside his bed. "You should rest," he murmured weakly. "I am not leaving," Illyra said firmly, taking his hand gently in both of hers. "Not until you understand everything I have learned. Cade, please, just listen to me this once." Something in her tone, desperate and utterly sincere, seemed to break through the exhausted guardedness still lingering in his expression. He nodded weakly, and Illyra, taking a steadying breath, finally explained everything she had discovered about the true nature of the ritual, about the symbol hidden within the journal's binding, about the ancient scroll describing the willing exchange required to properly close the curse forever. "It is dangerous," she said honestly, refusing to soften the truth, despite how badly she wanted to protect him from further fear. "The scroll warns clearly that a forced or hesitant exchange could shatter both our bloodlines entirely, rather than heal them. This cannot be attempted out of desperation or obligation, Cade. It has to be freely chosen, completely and honestly, or it will fail exactly as Ren's original curse failed generations ago." Cade was quiet for a long moment, studying her with an intensity that made her chest ache with uncertain hope. "And if I choose it," he said slowly, "freely, honestly, despite everything that has happened between us these past weeks, what does that require of me exactly?" "I do not fully understand the specifics," Illyra admitted. "The scroll speaks of offering a piece of your inherited strength, willingly and without coercion, mirrored by an equal offering from my own bloodline. It is not simply words spoken during a ceremony. It requires true, complete trust between us. The very thing your father's generation and Ren's broken heart never had the chance to build. Cade closed his eyes briefly, exhaustion and turmoil clearly warring within him. When he opened them again, something had shifted, quiet resolve replacing the guarded distance that had defined the past difficult days between them. I have spent my entire life watching this curse take everyone I loved, he said softly. My father, my brothers. I built walls around myself, specifically to avoid loving anyone deeply enough for it to hurt when the curse eventually came for me too. And then you arrived, Alira, and every single wall I built crumbled without my permission. Cade, let me finish, he said gently, though firmly. I was angry when I learned the truth, not because I stopped loving you, but because I was terrified that everything I felt for you might not have been real, might have simply been the curse manipulating me, exactly as it manipulated Ren's original alpha, generations ago. But lying here, watching you refuse to leave my side despite everything, I understand now that fear was never truly about you. It was about my own terror of losing something precious again. Tears blurred Alira's vision as she listened, hope finally daring to bloom fully within her chest, for the first time since their painful confrontation in his study. I choose this, Cade said, his voice growing stronger with quiet, unwavering certainty, freely and completely. Not because I am desperate to survive, though I certainly am that too, but because I love you, Alira Voss, curse and complicated bloodline included, more than I have ever loved anything in my entire life. The words settled over her like warm sunlight breaking through weeks of cold, uncertain storm. I love you too, she whispered, pressing a gentle kiss against his knuckles. I have from the moment you tore that carriage door open to save me, though I was far too stubborn to admit it for longer than I probably should have. A weak, genuine smile finally broke across Cade's exhausted features, the first real smile she had seen from him since the painful revelation weeks earlier. Then let us finish what Ren never had the chance to, he said, together, exactly as this curse always should have been ended. Word spread quickly through Blackridge once Cade's condition stabilized enough for him to explain his decision to the council. Garrick remained visibly uneasy about the risk involved, though even he could not deny the desperate urgency of their situation, now that Cade's collapse had proven exactly how quickly the curse's final stage could progress. Marin, by contrast, embraced the plan with fierce, determined hope, immediately organizing preparations for the ritual described within the ancient scroll. The ceremony required the old grounds beneath Blackridge, a sacred clearing said to be the exact location where Ren herself had once stood generations ago, calling forth the original curse in her heartbroken grief. It would need to be performed beneath a full moon, still 3 days away, giving Cade precious little time to recover his strength before facing whatever danger the ritual might demand. Those 3 days passed in a strange, fragile mixture of fear and quiet hope. Cade regained strength slowly under Ysolda's careful watch, while Alira spent every spare moment studying the ancient scroll, determined to understand every possible danger before leading them both into a ritual that had, according to Ren's own tragic history, already failed catastrophically once before. On the final evening before the ceremony, Cade found her alone in the garden, standing beside the same flowers that had bloomed so unexpectedly weeks earlier, now standing as quiet, undeniable proof of exactly how deeply their fates had already become intertwined. "Are you afraid?" he asked softly, coming to stand beside her. "Terrified," Alira admitted honestly, not simply of the ritual failing, but of losing you regardless of how it ends. Cade took her hand gently, lacing their fingers together with quiet, unwavering certainty. "Whatever happens tomorrow night," he said, "know that choosing you, fully and freely, has already been the truest, clearest decision I have ever made. Curse or no curse, Alira, I would choose you again, exactly as I am choosing you now." Beneath the darkening sky, surrounded by flowers that never should have bloomed, two people bound first by obligation, and now by genuine, hard-won love, stood quietly together, gathering courage for the dangerous, uncertain night that awaited them, hopeful that generations of grief and betrayal might finally, truly, come to an end beneath tomorrow's waiting full moon. The old grounds beneath Blackridge felt colder than the rest of the fortress, ancient stone worn smooth by generations of feet that had walked this same path long before either of them had been born. Alira walked beside Cade in silence, as Merrin led them deeper into the sacred clearing, torches casting long, flickering shadows against moss-covered walls that had clearly stood untouched for decades. The full moon hung heavy and bright directly overhead, exactly as the ancient scroll required, its silver light pooling across the same ground where Ren Voss had once stood generations ago, heartbroken and desperate enough to bind an entire bloodline to her own devastating grief. Garrick stood watch near the entrance, still visibly tense despite his reluctant acceptance of the plan, while Isolde arranged the final ritual components with careful, practiced precision along the clearing's edge. Alira's heart pounded steadily against her ribs. Fear and hope tangled so tightly together she could no longer fully separate one from the other. "Are you certain about this?" Merrin asked quietly, studying them both with unusual gentleness beneath her typical sharp composure. "We are certain," Cade said, glancing toward Alira with quiet, unwavering resolve. "Whatever happens tonight, we face it together." Alira nodded in silent agreement, though her hands trembled slightly as Isolde guided them both toward the center of the clearing, positioning them exactly opposite each other above a faint, weathered symbol carved permanently into the ancient stone beneath their feet, the same symbol Alira had discovered hidden within Ren's journal weeks earlier. "The exchange must be spoken freely," Isolde explained, her voice steady despite the weight of the moment. "Each of you must offer a piece of your inherited strength willingly, without hesitation, without fear, overriding honesty. The old texts are clear that anything less will fail exactly as it failed before." Cade reached across the small distance separating them, taking both of Alira's trembling hands firmly in his own. "Look at me," he said softly. "Not at the danger, not at the fear, just at me." Alira met his eyes, amber and steady, despite everything they had endured together these past difficult weeks, and felt her racing heart slowly begin to settle beneath the quiet certainty reflected there. "I offer this freely," Cade said, his voice carrying clearly through the silent clearing, exactly as the old scroll instructed. "My strength, inherited through generations of my bloodline, I offer completely, without hesitation, bound only by my choice to love you, exactly as you are, curse and complicated history included." A faint warmth began building at the center of their joined hands, gentle at first, then growing steadily stronger, a soft golden light that seemed to pulse in rhythm with both their heartbeats. Alira took a steadying breath, meeting his gaze fully as she spoke her own offering into the charged night air. "I offer this freely," she said, her voice growing stronger with each word, despite the trembling beginning to spread through her entire body. "My strength, inherited through Ren's own broken heart, through generations of grief she never chose but carried regardless. I offer completely, bound only by my choice to love you, Cade Thornwood, exactly as you are, wounds and history included." The warmth between their joined hands surged suddenly, bright enough that Merrin gasped softly from where she watched, bright enough that even Garrick took an involuntary step forward before catching himself. Alira felt something shift deep within her chest, painful and overwhelming all at once, as though a knot tied tightly for generations was finally, slowly beginning to loosen. Cade's grip tightened around her hands as the light intensified further, his expression tense with obvious effort, sweat beading along his brow despite the cool night air. "Stay with me," he said through gritted teeth. "Whatever this feels like, stay with me." "I am here," Alira promised, though the pain building steadily through her chest made speaking increasingly difficult. "I am not going anywhere." The golden light finally reached its peak, blinding and overwhelming, washing across the entire clearing in a single powerful wave that seemed to shake the ancient stone beneath their feet. For one terrifying, endless moment, Alira feared the scroll's warning had proven true after all, that their exchange, however genuine, had not been enough to prevent catastrophe. Then, just as suddenly as it had built, the light softened, fading gently into a warm, gentle glow that settled quietly around them both, like a final, tender embrace, before disappearing entirely, leaving the clearing bathed once more in nothing but ordinary moonlight. Alira swayed slightly, exhaustion crashing over her all at once, and Cade caught her immediately, pulling her carefully against his chest, as they both sank slowly to their knees on the ancient stone, breathing hard, hearts pounding in matching, unsteady rhythm. "Cade," Elira gasped, fear still lingering despite the fading light. "Are you—" "I feel," Cade said slowly, wonder creeping into his exhausted voice, as he seemed to search his own body for the familiar weakness that had plagued him for days. "Lighter. Steadier. Elira, I think." He did not finish the sentence, laughter breaking free instead, disbelieving and joyful all at once, the sound echoing warmly through the quiet clearing. Elira felt her own relieved laughter bubble up to match his, tears streaming freely down her face, as the full weight of what they had just accomplished finally settled fully into her understanding. Isolde approached slowly, checking Cade's pulse with careful, practiced hands, her expression shifting gradually from cautious concern into genuine, astonished relief. "Steady," she confirmed softly. "Strong. Whatever curse plagued this bloodline for generations, I believe, truly believe, it has finally been laid to rest." Marin's composed exterior finally broke, tears of her own slipping free as she embraced them both fiercely, Garrick standing quietly nearby, his earlier skepticism finally softening into something close to humble respect as he watched his alpha rise slowly to his feet, stronger and steadier than Blackridge had seen him in years. The following weeks brought a transformation to Blackridge that the fortress had not experienced in generations. Cade's strength continued steadily, no further collapses, no lingering weakness, simply the quiet, confident vitality of a man finally freed from a shadow that had haunted his entire bloodline since long before his birth. The council, once wary and divided, began speaking openly of Elira not as a fragile political bargain, but as the true Luna who had saved their alpha, and by extension, their entire pack's future. Garrick sought her out personally one afternoon in the training yard, his usual guarded expression softened into something almost sheepish. "I owe you an apology," he said. "I judged you before I understood the weight of what you carried, or the courage it took to face it directly." "You were protecting your pack," Elira said gently. "I cannot fault you for that, Garrick, not when it turned out your caution was reasonably earned." "Perhaps," Garrick said, "but even reasonable caution should leave room for recognizing genuine courage when it stands directly in front of us. Truly this time." Elira smiled warmly, accepting his respect with the same quiet grace she had carried since her very first, terrifying night in this fortress, back when she had been nothing more than a frightened bride, bracing for a marriage built entirely on obligation and fear. That evening, she stood beside Cade along the same fortress wall, where their fragile trust had first truly begun taking shape, watching the sun set golden and warm over mountains that finally felt fully like home, rather than simply a place she had been sent to survive. "I did not expect this," Cade admitted quietly, echoing words he had spoken to her weeks earlier, though the meaning behind them had transformed entirely since then. A marriage meant to end a curse, becoming instead the truest, most genuine love I have ever known. "Neither did I," Elira said, leaning gently against him, as his arms settled naturally around her shoulders. "I came here, believing I was simply a bargaining chip, meant to buy safety for my people. I never imagined I would find an entire life here instead, one built on choice, rather than obligation." Cade pressed a soft kiss against her temple, warmth and certainty radiating from him in a way that would have seemed impossible to the cold, guarded man who had barely acknowledged her on their wedding day. "The curse painted my bloodline as cursed for generations," he said quietly. "But I think, in the end, it was never truly about punishment at all. It was about two broken hearts, separated by generations, finally finding their way toward the healing neither Ren nor her lost alpha ever had the chance to complete." Elira turned to face him fully, cupping his face gently in her hands, her heart full in a way she had never dared hope possible when she first arrived at these unfamiliar gates, frightened and alone. "Then let us make sure," she said softly, "that this healing lasts far longer than the curse ever did." Cade smiled, warm and unguarded, pulling her close as the last golden light of sunset faded gently into a clear, peaceful evening sky above Blackridge. The fortress that had once feared its own bloodline now stood steady and strong, no longer haunted by generations of grief, but held instead by a love freely chosen, honestly given, and finally, completely whole. And somewhere beneath the ancient stone of the old grounds, where a heartbroken woman had once bound an entire bloodline to her own devastating sorrow generations ago, the wind finally settled into quiet, peaceful stillness, as though even the mountains themselves understood that the long, painful story of the Thornwood curse had, at last, found its truly deserved and long overdue happy ending.